The shoebox sat open on a folding table inside a Dorchester triple-decker at 5:11 in the morning, and inside it, agents counted 47 preloaded SIM cards, each one labeled in blue ballpoint pen with a phone number that belonged to someone else. The handwriting was careful, almost meticulous, each digit squared off like a kid copying vocabulary words for a spelling test. Upstairs, a 19-year-old was still in his boxers, face down on the carpet, hands zip-tied behind his back, while his mother stood in the hallway in her work scrubs asking, over and over, what her son had done. A responding agent would later describe her voice as flat with disbelief, the kind of flat that comes right before it cracks. What he'd done, according to the indictment unsealed that afternoon in federal court in Boston, was hijack at least 130 phone numbers and help drain $9.2 million from strangers who never saw it coming. His name, at least the one his mother used, was Marcus de Leon. Online, in the encrypted channels where he did his real work, he went by Rev. Neighbors on Bowdoin Street knew him as the quiet kid who walked to community college 3 mornings a week and helped an elderly neighbor carry her groceries up the porch steps. He was enrolled part-time in an associate's degree program in computer information systems, a detail prosecutors would later note without irony, since the technical education he was paying tuition for barely registered next to what he'd already taught himself for free in Discord servers at 2 in the morning. Nobody on that street had any idea that the same hands carrying grocery bags had, prosecutors allege, unlocked bank accounts belonging to a retired nurse in Quincy, a crypto trader in Cambridge, and dozens of others across 6 states. This is the story of how that gap got closed. Not by a brilliant piece of digital forensics, not by a confidential informant flipping under pressure, but by a single screenshot that Marcus de Leon posted to brag to people he'd never met. A screenshot he was warned, more than once, not to post. He posted it anyway. 11 months of quiet FBI casework ended, not because federal agents outsmarted him, but because he couldn't resist showing off. Before the raid, before the ledger, before the $9.2 million figure meant anything to anyone outside a small cyber squad in Boston's FBI field office, there was just a phone call. It came in on the afternoon of June 14, 2024, to the Quincy Police Department, and it came from a 67-year-old retired nurse named Margaret Sullivan. She told the officer on the line that her phone had gone dead around 11:40 that night. No bars, no signal. She assumed it was a network outage and went to bed. By morning, $84,000 was gone from her retirement savings, moved out in 4 transfers she never authorized and never saw coming. Margaret Sullivan had worked 31 years at a hospital in Quincy, most of them on the overnight cardiac unit, the kind of job that trains a person to notice when something is quietly, dangerously wrong, long before the monitors start screaming. She'd retired 18 months earlier, in December 2022, after her husband's death left her managing their combined savings alone, for the first time in 3 decades of marriage. She kept her savings conservative, mostly in a money market account, the kind of account that isn't supposed to be exciting. She didn't use crypto. She didn't click on strange links. Her son had set up 2-factor authentication on her accounts himself, walking her through it over the phone one Sunday afternoon, both of them proud of how careful they were being. Her phone simply stopped working for 6 hours, and when it came back on, someone else had been living inside her digital life the entire time. In the days after, Sullivan told a victim advocate that the worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing that the same 2-factor codes she'd been taught to trust, the ones that were supposed to prove a login was really her, had been the exact thing the thieves needed most. The safety net had become the trap door. That's what a SIM swap actually is, and it's worth understanding before anything else in this story makes sense. Every cell phone number is tied to a small chip, the SIM card, that tells the network which physical device gets your calls and texts. If someone convinces your carrier to move your number onto a different SIM card, one they control, your phone goes dark, their phone lights up. Every text message, every 2-factor login code, every forgot your password reset link. All of it, silently redirected to a stranger, sitting in a car 3 states away. For Margaret Sullivan, the stranger was a 2-man team, working out of a rented Kia in Providence, Rhode Island, 22 miles from her house, close enough to watch her bank's fraud alerts trigger in real time on a second burner phone, far enough that she'd never think to look there. Investigators would later reconstruct that night almost minute by minute, using cell tower records and the rental company's GPS telemetry on the Kia itself. The vehicle, a gray 2021 Sorento rented under a fake corporate account 2 days earlier, parked in a strip mall lot off Route 6 just after 11 p.m. Two men sat inside for nearly 3 hours. Engine off, windows cracked despite the October chill, running on a portable battery pack to keep 2 phones and a laptop charged without leaving an idling engine that might draw a patrol officer's attention. One phone handled the bribed retail employee's confirmation text. The second phone, the one that would receive Margaret Sullivan's redirected texts and calls, sat propped against the dashboard, screen brightness turned all the way down. At 11:38 p.m., the swap went through. At 11:40, Sullivan's phone lost signal. Between 11:41 and 5:14 the following morning, the 2 men in the Kia worked through a script they'd clearly rehearsed. Call the bank's automated line, trigger a password reset using the intercepted text codes, log into the money market account, and initiate 4 transfers, each one calibrated just under the threshold that would have triggered an automatic fraud hold. They split the work quietly, one man narrating numbers while the other typed, the laptop's glow the only light in the car for 6 hours. By the time the first transfer cleared, the 2 men were already back on I-95, headed south, the Kia's odometer logging the return trip, before either man had gotten more than 4 hours of sleep that week. That level of discipline, that patience, is what separated this crew from the opportunistic scams Restrepo's squad usually saw. Most SIM swap fraud gets sloppy fast, cashed out in one greedy transfer that trips an alert within the hour. This crew treated Margaret Sullivan's account like a job with a shift schedule. Boston's FBI field office opened a case file in July 2024, 1 month after the Sullivan complaint, and assigned it to a mid-career cyber squad agent named Elena Restrepo. Restrepo had spent 6 years working wire fraud and business email compromise cases, and before that, 4 years as a forensic accountant at a regional bank. A background that made her unusually fast at reading a wire transfer trail the way most agents read a suspect's body language. She'd never seen a SIM swap complaint escalate the way this one did. Within 3 weeks, 2 more nearly identical complaints landed on her desk. A dentist in Braintree who lost $31,000, and a small business owner in Weymouth who lost $19,400 from a payroll account. Same pattern. Same 6-hour blackout window. Same 4-transfer cash-out structure. The dentist, Dr. Aidan Marsh, ran a small 3-chair practice out of a strip mall on Grove Street in Braintree, the kind of practice that survives on Yelp reviews and word of mouth, rather than corporate backing. He'd financed a new imaging machine 18 months earlier, a decision that left the practice's operating account thinner than he liked, and the $31,000 the SIM swap crew drained wasn't retirement savings sitting idle. It was 3 months of payroll for 2 hygienists and a receptionist, money he'd set aside specifically so he wouldn't have to make a panicked call to the bank the next time equipment financing came due. He told Restrepo's team that the hardest part wasn't the number itself. It was explaining to his staff, people who trusted him to keep the lights on, why their next paychecks might be late, through no fault of anyone in that building. The Weymouth business owner, a woman named Priya Anand, who ran a landscaping company with 11 employees, lost $19,400 from a payroll account 2 weeks after Dr. Marsh's practice was hit. She didn't have Marsh's imaging machine debt, but she had something else. A crew of seasonal workers paid weekly, in cash and check both, who depended on Friday deposits landing on time. When the transfer cleared, she used a business line of credit to cover that Friday's payroll herself, rather than tell 11 people their checks might bounce. It took her 4 months to pay that line of credit back down, 4 months of treating a crime she didn't cause like a debt she owed. Restrepo built a spreadsheet, color-coded by victim, carrier, blackout window, and transfer count, the kind of document that starts as a simple tracking tool and slowly becomes an obsession. By September 2024, that spreadsheet had grown to 19 victims across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, with combined losses climbing past $2.1 million. Whoever was doing this wasn't opportunistic. This was a system, run with the discipline of people who'd done it enough times to know exactly how long a bank's fraud department takes to notice a transfer, and exactly how long they had before it got flagged. One detail that stuck with Restrepo, she told colleagues later, was how boring the victims were. Not boring as people, boring as targets. No celebrities, No obvious crypto whales bragging online about their holdings. Just a retired nurse, a dentist, a payroll account. Whoever picked these targets wasn't hunting for flashy scores. They were hunting for people who wouldn't notice fast enough to matter. The break, such as it was in the early months, came from carrier logs. Restrepo subpoenaed records from 3 of the largest wireless carriers operating in the Northeast, looking for SIM swap requests processed on victims' accounts around the exact hours their phones had gone dark. What came back in October 2024 was a list of 11 retail store locations where the swaps had been physically executed, not through a call center, not through an app, but by an employee standing behind a counter, tapping a few keys. 11 stores, 6 different states, no obvious connection between them, on paper. That's the first real obstacle the investigation hit, and it very nearly stalled the case for good. 11 retail locations owned by 5 different corporate franchisees meant 11 separate sets of employees, 11 separate management chains, and no clean way to subpoena all of it without tipping off whoever was running the operation. Restrepo's supervisor, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Daniel Reyes, told her flatly in a case review meeting that if they moved too fast on the carrier side, they'd burn the whole thing before they even knew who they were chasing. So they slowed down. For 3 months, from October 2024 through January 2025, agents did nothing but watch. They cross-referenced employee schedules against the exact timestamps of confirmed swaps. They looked for names that showed up working the counter more than once when a victim's number went dark. Slowly, painstakingly, a short list emerged. 7 employees, working at 7 of those 11 stores, whose shifts lined up with fraudulent swaps far too often to be coincidence. By late January 2025, Restrepo had her 7 names. She thought that was the hard part. She was wrong. What she didn't know yet was that one of those 7 employees was about to become the key that unlocked the entire crew, and that the crew itself was smaller, younger, and far more reckless than anyone in that Boston field office expected. One of the 7 employees was a 20-year-old named Jalen Cross, who worked the counter at a Metro Wireless location on Blue Hill Avenue in Dorchester. Cross's shifts matched confirmed swap windows on 6 separate occasions. When agents approached him in February 2025 under a cooperation agreement, he didn't fight it. He'd been paid $200 in cash per SIM swap, sometimes delivered in an envelope left in his car, sometimes handed to him directly by a teenager he knew only as Rev. Cross had never met De Leon's face-to-face partners. He didn't know real names, but he knew the Cash App handle the payments came from, and he knew the general description: a young black man, maybe 18 or 19, who always wore the same Navy Patriots hoodie and never stayed in the store more than 90 seconds. The interview itself happened in a nondescript conference room at the Boston field office on a Tuesday morning, coffee going cold in paper cups on the table, Cross's court-appointed attorney seated beside him reviewing the terms of the cooperation agreement one more time before he signed. Restrepo led the session with a second agent taking notes, and she later described Cross as more relieved than scared, like a kid who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally been given permission to put it down. He admitted the first swap almost apologetically, saying he'd told himself it was a favor for a regular. The same phrase, almost word for word, that 2 of the other bribed employees would use months later in their own proffer sessions, as if the entire crew had passed the same rationalization around like a shared alibi. Cross walked agents through the mechanics in granular detail, how Rev would text him a target's phone number and the last 4 digits of a fake ID he'd supply as backup verification, how the transaction on the store's system looked identical to a legitimate customer swap, how the whole thing took less time than ringing up a phone case. He never asked what happened to the numbers afterward. He said he didn't want to know, and agents believed him, because nothing in 6 months of financial records showed Cross benefiting beyond the flat $200 fee, no lifestyle upgrade, no unexplained deposits beyond the swap payments themselves. It was the kind of small, contained corruption that made him useful as a cooperating witness rather than a target, consistent, low-level, and entirely willing to talk once the alternative was explained to him. That description, combined with the Cash App trail, gave Restrepo her first real thread to pull. Financial records tied the Cash App account to a prepaid debit card, and the prepaid debit card, purchased with cash at a CVS on Washington Street in October 2023, had been registered using an email address that reused a childhood nickname, Revlacross02. A quick search connected that email to a Discord account, and the Discord account connected to a private, invite-only server with a name that told agents everything they needed to know about the scale of what they were looking at. Swap Gang. Here's what's most surprising about Swap Gang, and it's not the size of the crew. It's how small the actual crew was. Investigators expected, based on the scope of the fraud, to find a sprawling criminal organization, maybe a dozen or more people. What they found instead was 3 core members and a rotating cast of bribed retail employees who never even knew each other's names. Marcus De Leon ran reconnaissance and target selection. A 24-year-old named Tyrick Boone, with a prior conviction for check fraud in Rhode Island, handled the actual cash-out once accounts were compromised. And a 21-year-old woman living in Providence, Ava Lindquist, handled the social engineering calls when a store employee couldn't be bribed and a swap had to be talked through over the phone instead. 3 people, $9.2 million. It doesn't seem like it should add up, and the fact that it does is exactly why this case worried the FBI's cyber division enough to brief it up the chain to Washington. Put yourself in Restrepo's position for a second. You've got a Discord handle, a nickname tied to a childhood email, and a description of a hoodie. You don't have a face. You don't have a real name yet. And you know that every day you wait, someone else's phone is going dark at 11 at night while they sleep, unaware that their entire financial life is being quietly rerouted. The nurse's $84,000 was gone before anyone even knew to look for the pattern. By February 2025, the total had grown past $4 million. Then came the case's most damaging single loss, one that would eventually anchor the entire federal indictment. Derek Chen, a 34-year-old day trader living in Cambridge, lost $1.2 million in Bitcoin on the night of February 19, 2025. Chen had built that position over 6 years, starting with a $4,000 purchase in 2018 that he made half as a joke after a coworker wouldn't stop talking about it at lunch. He'd quit a stable job in medical device sales in 2021 once his portfolio's gains outpaced his salary 3 years running, and by early 2025, he was trading full-time from a 1-bedroom apartment near Kendall Square, treating it, by his own account to investigators, as a disciplined profession rather than a gamble. He kept meticulous spreadsheets. He used a hardware wallet for the bulk of his long-term holdings. The $1.2 million that got stolen sat in a hot wallet connected to an exchange account he used for active trading, the one category of holdings he hadn't yet migrated to cold storage, a decision he would later call the most expensive procrastination of his life. Chen had used SMS-based 2-factor authentication on his crypto exchange account, believing it was secure enough, a belief the exchange's own onboarding materials had reinforced by listing SMS verification as a recommended security step rather than flagging it as the weakest option available. It took the Swap Gang crew 14 minutes from the moment his SIM was swapped to the moment his exchange wallet was emptied into an address the FBI would later trace through a mixing service and out the other side into a fresh wallet the crew controlled. 14 minutes. That's roughly how long it takes to make a sandwich. That's how long Derek Chen's life savings took to disappear. Chen told investigators he woke up to a text from his own bank, not the exchange, flagging unusual activity on a linked account. The first sign anything was wrong. By the time he'd found his phone, restarted it twice thinking it had simply frozen overnight, and finally borrowed a neighbor's phone to call his carrier, the trades were already settled and irreversible. He described the sensation less as panic and more as a strange, hollow calm, the kind that comes from watching a number on a screen change and understanding, all at once, that no amount of clicking or calling was going to change it back. Chen's case is also where the money trail finally became traceable, and where agents got their clearest look at how the laundering actually worked. Stolen crypto moved first into a mixing service designed to obscure its origin. From there, small amounts, usually under $10,000 at a time, to avoid triggering exchange reporting thresholds, were converted back into cash through peer-to-peer trading apps. Boone, the 24-year-old cash-out specialist, ran roughly 40% of those trades personally, meeting buyers in parking lots across Providence and Pawtucket with a backpack and a burner phone. An obstacle nearly ended the case here. In March 2025, one of the crew's regular cash-out contacts, a peer-to-peer crypto trader who'd unknowingly been laundering stolen funds for months, got spooked after a local news segment about crypto scams and stopped responding to Boone's messages entirely. For nearly 3 weeks, The crew's cash-out pipeline went dry, and with it, agents worried their financial trail would go cold too, since the mixing service made it nearly impossible to track funds sitting untouched. Restrepo's team solved it the unglamorous way. They kept pulling exchange records for every wallet that had ever touched the mixer output, waiting for the crew to find a new outlet, which they eventually did in April, reopening the trail agents needed. The money never really slept, though. Across the full run of the operation, investigators eventually traced the laundering pipeline through 4 distinct stages. The SIM swap intake, where stolen credentials converted directly into crypto transfers. The mixing layer, where roughly $9.2 million in dirty funds passed through obfuscation services. The peer-to-peer cash-out layer, where Boone and 2 associates converted crypto into physical cash in amounts under reporting thresholds. And finally, a small real estate layer, where DeLeon's mother's name, without her knowledge, prosecutors would later stress, appeared on a $340,000 down payment for a triple-decker property purchase that never closed. That real estate detail is one prosecutors leaned on hard, because it showed DeLeon wasn't just spending like a reckless teenager. He was trying to build something that looked, on paper, like legitimate wealth. A 19-year-old attempting to launder cybercrime money into real estate is not a common profile, and it told Restrepo's team they weren't dealing with someone who planned to stop. Weeks before any of that came together, a separate piece of the investigation was unfolding quietly inside a digital forensics lab 2 floors below Restrepo's desk. Every device the crew touched, once seized, would eventually pass through that lab. But even before the raid, forensic examiners were working ahead of the arrests, building a technical foundation the eventual indictment would lean on. They'd obtained a preservation order for the Swap Gang Discord server's message logs in January 2025, locking down years of chat history before anyone in the crew could delete it, a step that later proved critical once DeLeon's April screenshot needed context to prosecute. The lab's job was tedious, in a way true crime stories rarely dwell on, cataloging thousands of message timestamps, cross-referencing usernames against the handful of real identities agents had already confirmed, and building a chain of custody log meticulous enough to survive a defense challenge in federal court. One examiner spent the better part of 6 weeks doing nothing but timestamp reconciliation, converting server logs recorded in UTC into local time for each of the 6 states where victims lived, so that every alleged swap could be matched precisely against carrier records showing exactly when a given victim's phone had gone dark. It was slow, unglamorous work, the kind that never makes it into a trailer, but it was also the work that turned a folder of screenshots into an airtight timeline no defense attorney could later poke holes in. What strikes us about this case, more than the technology or the money, is how ordinary the entry point was. This wasn't a sophisticated hacking operation breaking through firewalls. It was a bribed clerk earning $200 in cash at a strip mall wireless store. The most expensive fraud schemes in America increasingly don't start with code. They start with a $20 bill folded into a handshake at a counter nobody thinks twice about. By April 2025, Restrepo's team had identified 6 bribed carrier employees across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Florida, the same 6 states where the earliest carrier logs had shown swap activity. A federal wiretap warrant, approved in late March 2025, gave agents access to encrypted messages between DeLeon and Boone for the first time. Getting there required a 31-page affidavit from Restrepo, laying out probable cause across 9 months of financial records, carrier logs, and the cross-cooperation agreement, reviewed by a federal magistrate judge in Boston, who signed the order on March 24, 2025, with a standard 30-day authorization that would later require one extension to cover the full window agents needed. What they found in those chats read less like a criminal conspiracy and more like a badly run small business, complaints about a slow cash-out day, arguments over who got credit for which score, and DeLeon repeatedly reminding Boone to keep it quiet, we're not invincible. DeLeon didn't take his own advice. On April 11, 2025, in the Swap Gang Discord server, DeLeon posted a screenshot of a crypto wallet balance, roughly $612,000, sitting in a single address, with a caption bragging that, "Nobody swipes a nurse and walks away clean, except me." The message he never should have sent sat in that server for maybe 6 hours, before an undercover FBI account, already embedded in the channel since February, captured it in full. Here's the take that'll probably get us some pushback. De Leon wasn't caught because federal investigators were smarter than him. He was caught because he needed people who'd never met him to think he was dangerous. That need, that specific teenage hunger for respect from strangers online, cost him more than any wiretap or subpoena. If he'd simply stayed quiet, the case against him would have taken years longer to build, if it ever got built at all. The screenshot itself carried embedded metadata, EXIF data most casual users never think to strip before posting. Buried in that metadata was a GPS coordinate accurate to within roughly 15 feet, pointing directly at a residential address on Bowdoin Street in Dorchester. The device model listed in the metadata also matched an iPhone purchase made 11 days earlier at an Apple store in the Natick Mall, paid for in cash. The exact serial number later confirmed against store receipts once agents obtained a search warrant for that record. De Leon had told his own crew, more than once, that he never touched victim data directly, and that his role was strictly reconnaissance, insulated from the technical swap itself. The metadata told federal agents a different story. That specific iPhone, tied to that specific address, had been logged into 3 separate victim accounts in the weeks before the screenshot was posted, according to login records agents later obtained from the affected platforms. By the first week of May 2025, Restrepo had what she needed: a residential address, a confirmed device, financial records tying De Leon to the Cash App payments made to Jalen Cross, and wiretap audio of De Leon discussing specific victim names with Boone. What she didn't have yet, and what worried Reyes enough to delay the raid by another 3 weeks, was proof that the ledger they suspected existed. A physical, handwritten record of every bribed employee across 6 states was actually real, and not just something the crew referenced in code over encrypted chat. A confidential source close to Boone confirmed it in late May. De Leon kept a small spiral notebook, handwritten, listing employee first names next to store locations and swap dates, because he didn't trust digital records to survive a raid. It was, in its own way, the least digitally native part of an entirely digital crime. Old-fashioned paper, kept specifically to defeat modern forensics, would end up being the single most damning piece of physical evidence agents recovered. The raid was scheduled for Tuesday, June 3, 2025, at 5 a.m., time to catch De Leon and his mother both asleep, and to minimize any risk of the ledger being destroyed. 11 FBI agents, 2 Boston Police Department officers for perimeter support, and a digital forensics specialist assembled 2 blocks away at 4:15 a.m. Temperature that morning sat at 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Light rain had fallen overnight, leaving the pavement on Bowdoin Street slick under the streetlights. Agents ran a final briefing in the back of an unmarked van, headlights off, radios set to a channel reserved for the operation, going over floor plans pulled from the triple-decker's building permit records, and a photograph of De Leon's bedroom window taken during an earlier drive-by surveillance pass. The entry team wore soft body armor under plain jackets. No raid windbreakers, a deliberate choice meant to avoid alerting neighbors before the operation was underway. The forensics specialist waited in a second vehicle, with evidence bags, chain of custody forms, and a Faraday bag, designed to isolate any seized phone from cell signal the instant it was recovered, preventing a remote wipe command from reaching the device. At 5:11 a.m., agents breached the front door of the triple-decker's second-floor unit. De Leon was asleep in his childhood bedroom, laptop still open on the desk beside his bed, logged into an active session on one of Derek Chen's compromised accounts. Agents recovered that laptop within the first 90 seconds of entry, still unlocked, a detail that would later remove any argument that De Leon hadn't personally accessed victim accounts. In a closet, agents found the shoebox, 47 preloaded SIM cards, each labeled with a phone number in blue ballpoint pen, ready to be handed to a bribed employee or activated remotely. Underneath the shoebox, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, was the spiral notebook. 14 carrier employee first names, cross-referenced against store locations in 6 states, with swap dates going back to January 2024, 5 months before the Sullivan case that first opened the investigation. The arithmetic in that notebook stopped everyone in that room. 14 months of activity, 6 states, 130 confirmed victims once agents cross-referenced every date against carrier logs, $9.2 million in total losses, more than 4 times what Restrepo's spreadsheet had shown just 8 months earlier. De Leon's mother, who worked overnight shifts as a certified nursing assistant, stood in the hallway in her scrubs, having just returned from her own shift 20 minutes before agents arrived. She told investigators she had no idea what was in the closet. She'd assumed the shoebox was old sneakers. Financial records later confirmed she had no knowledge of the $340,000 real estate transaction attempted in her name, and no charges were ever filed against her. She would later tell a victim advocate assigned to the family, in a moment that made even the forensic specialist pause mid-inventory, that she'd worked double shifts for years to keep her son in community college so he wouldn't end up doing anything like what she now understood he'd been doing the entire time she thought he was studying. Tyrick Boone was arrested the same morning at an apartment in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where agents recovered roughly $180,000 in cash and a second burner phone containing text threads matching the wiretap intercepts. Boone had a prior check fraud conviction from 2021, a case that had earned him 18 months of probation and, according to his own later proffer statement, a working knowledge of exactly how much cash could move through informal channels before it drew regulatory attention. Agents also recovered a small ledger of his own in the Pawtucket apartment, less detailed than De Leon's notebook, but sufficient to corroborate roughly 60 of the cash-out transactions already suspected from wiretap audio. Boone's own interview happened later that same day, in a borrowed conference room at the Providence field office, and it went nothing like Cross's. Where Cross had been relieved, Boone was calculating, running the math out loud on what cooperation might buy him against what a trial verdict might cost him, the same math prosecutors said he'd clearly run before on his 2021 check fraud case. He asked for his attorney within the first 4 minutes and said almost nothing substantive for 6 weeks, until his own defense counsel, reviewing the wiretap transcripts the government had already turned over in discovery, told him plainly that the recorded audio left no real room to negotiate around. When Boone finally sat down for a proffer session in July 2025, he didn't just confirm the cash-out mechanics agents had already reconstructed. He corrected 2 of their assumptions, explaining that roughly $600,000 of the total hadn't gone through the mixing service at all, but had instead been converted through a second, smaller peer-to-peer network he'd set up specifically to avoid overloading the first one and drawing attention to unusually high volume on a single trading account. It was, in its own way, the same instinct that ran through the whole operation: never take enough from one place, one account, one channel, to make anyone look twice. Ava Lindquist was arrested 4 hours later at a coffee shop in Providence, where she'd stopped to meet a peer-to-peer crypto contact, unaware the raid had already happened. Agents had been tracking her movements since the wiretap first identified her voice on calls impersonating bank fraud department representatives, a role she'd apparently developed on her own after De Leon's crew found that certain carrier employees couldn't be bribed and had to be talked into processing swaps under the guise of a legitimate customer service escalation. Her arrest was quiet by comparison, 2 plainclothes agents approaching her table as she waited for a latte, informing her of the warrant before she'd even opened her laptop. Would you have noticed the signs before it was too late? Margaret Sullivan didn't. Derek Chen didn't. Neither did the 6 carrier employees who took $200 in cash and told themselves it was a harmless favor for a regular customer. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath this entire case. Almost nobody involved thought they were doing something catastrophic in the moment. They thought they were doing something small. Jalen Cross, the Metro Wireless employee whose cooperation cracked the case open, was never charged criminally, in exchange for his full cooperation and testimony. The other 6 bribed employees across 5 states were charged separately in a related federal case, 5 of whom eventually pleaded guilty to wire fraud conspiracy charges between August and November 2025. De Leon was indicted on September 9, 2025, on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. Facing a potential sentence of up to 20 years on the identity theft charges alone, he agreed to a plea deal in December 2025, pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and aggravated identity theft in exchange for cooperation against Boone and Lindquist. Would the system have caught De Leon eventually without the screenshot? That's genuinely worth sitting with. Is this justice served, or too little too late for the 130 people who lived through it? Margaret Sullivan, for her part, told a Quincy District Court victim impact hearing in February 2026 that she'd changed banks twice since the incident and still doesn't trust her phone the way she used to. She described sleeping with her phone across the room now, plugged in but powered down overnight, a habit her son calls excessive and she calls the only thing that lets her sleep at all. Derek Chen recovered roughly $340,000 of his $1.2 million loss through a civil settlement with his exchange, but the rest, converted through the mixing service and cashed out in small amounts across 3 states, was gone for good. Chen has since moved the entirety of his remaining holdings into cold storage and told investigators, somewhat ruefully, that the lesson cost him considerably more than any security course ever would have. On March 17, 2026, Marcus DeLeon was sentenced in federal court in Boston to 8 years in prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and ordered to pay $9.2 million in restitution, jointly with his co-defendants, an amount he will almost certainly never fully repay. Tyrick Boone received 9 years, a harsher sentence tied to his prior conviction and his direct role in cash-out operations. Ava Lindquist, who cooperated early and provided testimony against both men, received 18 months and was released in early 2026. Unpopular opinion, and we'll say it plainly, 9 years for Boone, a career fraudster who ran the cash-out side of a $9.2 million operation, feels about right. 8 years for a 19-year-old who built the whole architecture, recruited the bribes, and personally accessed victim accounts, feels light given the number of lives it touched. Judges have to weigh age and rehabilitation potential. Victims like Margaret Sullivan have to live with what's gone, regardless of how that math gets weighed. The case, formally closed in federal court on March 17, 2026, remains one of the largest SIM swap prosecutions the Boston field office has handled, and Restrepo's team has since used the case's financial forensics playbook, tracing crypto through mixing services back to a physical cash-out layer, as a training model for other cyber squads investigating similar schemes nationwide. What do you think? Did the system fail these 130 victims by letting this run for 14 months before an arrest, or was that timeline the unavoidable cost of building a case strong enough to actually convict 3 separate people across a 6-state network? We read every comment, so tell us honestly where you land. There's a piece of this case we couldn't fit into this video. Internal carrier records suggesting at least 2 additional bribed employees, outside the 6 charged, may still be operating in a similar scheme in the Mid-Atlantic region, according to a source close to the investigation. If you want us to dig into that thread, drop more in the comments, and we'll come back to it. For now, the shoebox sits in an FBI evidence locker in Boston. 47 SIM cards that will never activate anyone's stolen number again. A spiral notebook that outlived every encrypted app the crew trusted more than paper. And a 19-year-old who had $9.2 million pass through his hands and is now measuring his 20s in an 8-year federal sentence because he couldn't resist one screenshot, to strangers, in a server he thought no one was watching. If this case pulled you in, the Hydra darknet takedown and the Conti ransomware bust on this channel go even deeper into how federal agents trace money nobody thinks can be traced. Subscribe if you want the next declassified case the moment it drops.